I did have the unfortunate experience of one time not recording it.
Oh, no.
You know, the things that one learns humbleness from these things.
That's all right. A member of our team used to be a BBC reporter, and that happened to him 10 or 15 minutes into an interview with Mikhail Gorbachev.
And I mean, that's just when you're props. Thank you for that story, because mine was not.
Right, and puts it in perspective, right?
Yeah. So where we'll start is, I'll just say, welcome Kristen, who's the CEO for IREX, and that's the way?
IREX, President and CEO of IREX, yep.
And then I did look at your bio, and I think it's all very interesting, but to me it's more interesting if you just say what you want to about yourself. And I saw in the commencement address that you said something like, I think it was there, it might have been the Stanford article, that you said something like, it's what a wild and crazy ride it's been. Those weren't your words, but who knew that I would get here?
Right.
So that'll probably be where I'd like to go, just to start with, and then we'll take it from there, if that's okay.
Sure, why don't we get started? Because I know we have till 3, and I see we're
going.
Yeah, good.
Hello, Kristen Lord. I'm so fortunate to be here today with Kristen Lord. She is currently the CEO of IREX. She has she's an interesting pathway to get here, which I'll let her talk about. And let's just start there. So Kristen, tell us how you came to be where you are now. Is a little of your background.
Sure, and thank you so much for inviting me to do this, Lynn. It's really a pleasure to speak with you. I think I have a bit of an unconventional background for someone who's leading a global development organization. My PhD actually focused more on international politics and security. I worked as an associate dean and member of the faculty at George Washington University. I worked in the State Department. I worked in the Brookings Institution and for the Center for a New American Security. I led the U.S. Institute of Peace for a while. And the reason I say it's unconventional is that I'm a scholar and an academic by training. I've been running and building institutions, but mostly outside the development world. And I have personally never run what most people in our field would consider a traditional development project. Also, I have really had this varied background where I started much more on the think side, academia, the policy community, think tanks, and U.S. Institute of Peace was really my first job beyond education that was really combining real world programs on the ground around the world with a research and analytic and teaching component. So I feel like I've been on this long trajectory from the full think side to the do side. And of course, IREX is a global education development organization, is almost 100% a do organization, working in more than 100 countries a year on programs that are directly benefiting people around the world. So that's another thing that's very uncommon in the sector. And then the other thing, as I hinted at before, is the issues I've worked on have been much more related to national security, to science and technology, to the international information environment. And that's not a traditional background for people in international development, many of whom have focused on a very specific technical expertise area like health or agriculture. So in many ways, you can look at my background and think that it's just a crazy choice that I ended up here, a crazy accident that I ended up here. And in some ways, I agree with that. I certainly didn't predict it. But on the other hand, I think one of the things I have found very gratifying is that so many of the issues we work on are multidimensional, and they do touch on security and governance and politics and education and women's engagement and inclusion. So many of the issues we talk about and work on in international development actually benefit by being connected to a bigger, more strategic view of the world. Similarly, a lot of policy and academic research would actually benefit from the granular knowledge that development expertise has. So, in some ways I consider myself a bit of an accidental bridge builder, and that's made all the more easy by knowing people on different sides of the bridge and how they think about things. So it's unusual and unexpected, but it actually really makes sense. And from my own perspective, I feel like I've been working on the same issue set my whole career. I just keep coming at it from different ways, and it has been admittedly unconventional.
And so I think you've touched on this. And what if you're the bridge, like what are the main things that you're trying to bridge, what you get the two sides to see that they may not see?
Well, the first one I'll mention, because it's top of mind, is this one between the thinking and the doing. The way the development sector works, it can be very tactical. It's very focused on quality execution of development projects. That's what we're expected to do by donors. That's how a lot of people were trained. And there are some beneficial elements of that. But I think if we really want to move the needle on some very complex issues that we don't fully understand, we ought to consider a much tighter feedback loop between doing work on the ground and feeding that learning back into a research and policy agenda. Just this morning, I was meeting with my team on this issue of information and media literacy in the world, which has profound implications on civic engagement and governance and even national security. It has implications in countries that are going through elections, countries that are struggling with democratic reforms. Even in the West, Europe, United States, Australia, our own countries see efforts by various actors to manipulate our politics. So this issue of information and media literacy is highly relevant to a development agenda. I also ought to add, all the disinformation that's proliferated about international health issues like Ebola or polio vaccines, and how, informing citizens to make good decisions and sort fact from fiction, recognize emotional manipulation, that information consumption can really make a big difference to development outcomes. That's a development challenge that my organization is working on. But the fact of the matter is, it's not very well integrated into policy agendas. There's a lot of research out in the academic world that could be done, perhaps it could be done, that could be much better, more deeply connected. The scale of the challenge is so great that we on the development side would benefit from much faster iterative learning cycle where we're testing, learning, putting that learning back into projects and scaling all at the same time. That's not how traditional development projects are financed over long periods of time. We're trying hard to experiment with doing that, but it breaks the mold. And I think that's a good example of not all issues are like this. There are some just sort of low, steady slogs when you're trying to promote social progress. But there are many issues, like the example I just gave, that would benefit from this much tighter connection between development work, policy work, and academic research, with each one feeding the other to all of our benefit.
And so you have a vision of what, and just in this aspect, what you want to see happen, what you're trying to create, the bridge you're trying to build, and what do you have to do as a leader? Like, what are the skills that or behaviors or philosophies to lead that? That's one thing, is your vision. The other is, what do you do to get those people to go with you?
So I think there's an internal and an external component to that. So let me start with the external. The external is, my job as a leader is to help connect us to audiences that are not our usual partners. And that's where my background is a bit of an asset. So for instance, we just had a fascinating conversation with Peter Singer, who with his colleague Emerson Brooking is the author of a new book called Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media. That's a defense and security book. It's about national security. But guess what it ends with? A call for citizen information literacy is one of the major keys to make societies more resilient to this kind of security threat. Because my job is to build those bridges and help or an organization like ours work with partners who might not have seen it in that way, and to help those partners see how there are new solutions that aren't part of their usual toolkit. We're a different partner for them. And again, this is where my background might be a little bit helpful. The second thing is internally. So we are experimenting with some new internal organizational approaches where so for instance, in the traditional development funding mechanism, we have this project-based approach. You get a project to do, you get money to do a project in one country, you do it well, you report back to your donor. You have another project, you do it well, you report back to your donor. We are actually working on information and media literacy now in more than 10 countries, and we're trying to have a unified. It's funded by many different funders, and it has slightly different objectives and audiences in the different countries. But what we're trying to do is establish our own independent learning agenda that both supports and draws from those projects. And that means we have to conceptualize our work in a very different way. We have to somehow free up the resources to do that. And we still have to be good partners to our donors and fill all their needs. But we're trying to sort of go above and beyond in order to make more progress. And I use that example in part because it's very top of mind, but I think it's illustrative of the kind of challenges development leaders need to confront if we're going to think about these really moving the needle on social issues in a much more substantial way.
And so what kind of leader do you have to be? I get the networking, I'm hearing the networking, building, connecting, what you do internally within the organization. And what do you find works of how you Kristen, are that gets people to say yes?
Yeah.
Or moves it along?
Yeah, so let me say a little bit about IREX for your listeners who may not know us. Having heard this interview so far, they probably think we're a media literacy organization. We're not. That's one thing we do. But we're a human development organization where we focus on promoting more just, prosperous, and inclusive societies by helping people and communities to thrive. So we're not the kind of development organization that's giving people access to clean water or sanitation. We don't work on agriculture. We don't work on health. We're very much focused on investing in the potential of people and institutions, and how by engaging and empowering youth, creating strong institutions within societies, extending access to quality education information, and cultivating strong leaders at all levels of society, that people can advance their own development agenda, people can lift themselves out of poverty, people can create more prosperous and just societies for themselves. So that's really what we're doing more broadly. And I use the one example of information literacy. So the reason why I wanted to say that is because we actually work on a lot of different things. We're working on training secondary school teachers and supporting rising young African leaders, and doing strengthening independent media in conflict zones. And we are working to give young people job skills. So that all falls within that very people-oriented portfolio, but it means we're trying to do a lot of different things in a very agile way. We work in more than 100 countries a year. We have more than 22 international offices. So to answer your question, what that all means is that I need to create an environment where all of those people can do what they are good at, have space to operate in it, but also have some accountability, some backing, and also some encouragement. To lift their sights, to do better, to push harder, to look at things in a different way, to take something we've learned in one part of the organization and feed it into other parts of the organization, to be more reflective about what knowledge exists out there in the world that we could bring into our programming. So for instance, we've created a Center for Applied Learning and Impact so that we can really take the time to dig deep and do the research so that we can really enhance the impact of our programs. we completely reorganized how we're structured so that we're much better able to draw lessons from one part of the portfolio across the portfolio. And you know, when you're talking about a portfolio like ours, where you're investing in individual leaders at all levels of society and strong institutions, and as in a good educational and information environment where citizens can exist, the reason why we came up with those pillars, by the way, on engaging, empowering youth, the reason we came up with those 4 areas is because that cuts across our entire portfolio. So my job is to create an environment where that actually happens, and where people have that right mix of space and support and a little bit of encouragement, or you know, call to action to keep everybody moving forward at once. And with given the complexity of the issues we work on and the complexity of the organization, my job is to somehow keep the symphony playing in a way that is greater than the sum of its parts.
And it sounds like also not only are they playing, but they're finding, the way you described it, I think you said lift themselves up was the word you used, like they're finding they can even play more beautifully than they imagined.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think that, you know, I'm really blessed to work with some wonderfully talented people. But what we really want is not that you are precisely the sum of your parts, you know, each brilliant or dedicated person doing their own thing, but somehow by working with each other, challenging with each other, holding each other accountable, injecting new ideas, that somehow we have way more impact than any one of us could alone. And that's trying to create a climate where that happens on the issues we work on. You know, it's not a small challenge, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one. And when it works, it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, just like the symphony, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And also, there are 2 kinds of beauty that come from that. There's the music that comes from hearing everyone playing together and sort of the synergies, but there's also the opportunity to see people rise up inside that and do their best work. I mean, one of the best compliments I ever got as a leader was someone said to me, "You helped me to do my best work. You helped my colleagues to do their best work." And for me, that was the ultimate compliment. It's the kind of compliment where I really hoped it was true, but I sort of live trying to make it true, because I think it's one of the best things a leader can aspire to do. And so, you know, I try to remember the things that people say about me that even if they're not true, I really want them to be true. And how do you translate that into your day-to-day activities? And one of them is about helping people to do their best work.
And I imagine, not that I imagine, I know that it's hard to hold on to that. What am I doing or not doing to help people do their best work when you have so many other competing priorities?
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the challenges, there are always things grabbing at your ankles. You know, the personnel challenge, the complicated bureaucratic issue you have to deal with, the paperwork that someone finds out that they didn't file because of some law change in country X, Y, or Z. You know, there are all these things in development organizations, not to mention the really dangerous things. You know, your partners we had a partner who was murdered this year. We have partners who are intimidated and under threat. We have people who have all kinds of challenges. And so all of these things are incredibly time consuming. We have partners, we have donors, and the goal is to not let those things be so consuming that you can't actually make strategic progress. And one of the assets I have, and I think one of the things that leaders should strive to do, is build a really strong team so that it frees us from being constantly captured. I feel like I have a really amazingly strong executive team that allows me to be freed up to take the risks that nobody else can, or to look over the horizon, or to try and really be trying to create the space to push harder on certain things and prioritize at the strategic level. But it's always a fight in a complex organization, because there are constantly these things that are sucking you in, and anyone who runs a development or most kinds of organizations will recognize that phenomenon. and you have to deal with those things. It's not a choice in most cases. So you somehow have to figure out some kind of coping mechanism to keep your eye focused on the big picture.
So there's so many avenues that you're raising that I want to go down, and I want to switch a little bit so that we don't miss the one I want to get to, and I'll get back to these if we have time. So my two things that I'm sitting with that I don't want to miss are, you know, you're leading an organization now, and voila, you're a woman. So what is anything, and I'm thinking a lot about young women that are coming up, any learnings that you had. I think that a lot of us think that the factors that get in our way are external, when I also believe a lot of them are internal things that we make up. So any thoughts or learnings that you have had about coming up as a woman leader that would be useful to share?
I'll try. You know, one of the things I want to say is that although I am the first female president of IREX in 50 years, and there are not as many women leaders of large international development NGOs as you would think, given the large number of women in the sector overall. By far, I'm working with more women leaders than I've ever worked with in my entire life. I mean, recall, my dissertation is on the causes of war. I've worked in conflict and security, science and technology, and I once led a report about human development in the Arab world, and I was the only woman working on that study. So for me, actually, yes, I'm the first woman leader of IREX, but I'm around women more than ever, it's nice to see so many women leaders, and increasingly we see them in those other sectors I mentioned as well, like national security and science and technology. But I think one thing that I really benefited from, and see it even more so in hindsight, is wow, I had great mentors around me. And by the way, a lot of them were men. And I didn't realize it because they gave me so much support and space. I look back and think how crazy they must have been to give someone who was so young so much responsibility. But I just really benefited from that. And they treated me like a partner. And so I think that, you know, for younger women, you need that too. You need to hire a boss, as they say. You need to go out and find those people that you can learn from and who will support you. And looking for that, hire a boss, don't look for a job, is a really great mindset, I think, really for anybody, but I think particularly for women. And then the other thing is, you know what really gets a lot of women? Just this anxiety about the logistics of it all. Really, I mean, I've done it, you know, getting to soccer carpool and feeling like you're being a good mother and a good wife and being a leader and doing all the things you're supposed to do as a professional. I think men feel those things too. A lot of the men I work with feel that, but I think women are especially hard on themselves about that. And so I think women can do a lot just by pacing their own lives in a way they're comfortable with, dealing with the logistics, and also being a little bit less hard on themselves and each other. Because one thing I'll say from my male colleagues who are devoted fathers and professionals is they just don't worry about it quite as much, and they don't beat themselves up quite as much, and they just sort of do it. And there's something to be said for that, because I think one of the things that really amplifies the challenges that women face is these constant impossible expectations. And it gets all the worse now with social media. The young women I talk with regularly are just so anxious because they're constantly being held up against this impossible curated standard on social media. And so I think, you know, if you can surround yourself with mentors, supportive people, and also, you know, just not really expect that everything's going to be perfect all the time, or you have to be Wonder Woman all the time. I think that helps. And I I think I had it better than many because I had supportive people, my husband, my colleagues, my bosses. But I also think I had the benefit of not being on Facebook when I was younger.
Where everything looks like
Everything's perfect all the time. Everything's perfect all the time. And as you're struggling to deal with the sort of the logistics and the expectations of it all, I think that that only adds on top of it. So, you know, surround yourself with the right people, focus on what's actually important, and not what everybody just expects from you all the time, because it's impossible otherwise.
the bit I would add is not just what others expect of you, but what you are putting on yourself.
Yeah, no, precisely. And I hope I emphasize that too. I think it's what others expect, but I think it's what women hold themselves to impossible standards. Whereas men, I think, don't do that to themselves as much, even if they are also trying to juggle with, you know, being a good professional and colleague, being a good dad and husband. You know, I don't see my male colleagues and friends being quite as hard on themselves and holding themselves to quite such impossible standards. They just sort of, they kind of roll with it a little bit more. And, you know, maybe there's a lesson for women there that we should give ourselves a bit more of a break too.
Yeah, so it makes me, I want to, at a different time, you know, this makes me want to delve into this, write about it or something, because we need to reframe how we think we're measuring what we're doing. And we need to like get rid of that perfect, because it's no such thing. It ain't gonna happen, and it's hurting us. So.
Yeah, I do want to say though, I do want to emphasize, in case it didn't come across, I do think women have some special hurdles to overcome as leaders. I mean, any woman leader will recognize what they are, you know, the narrower line you have to walk, the behaviors you see your male colleagues accepting that you couldn't possibly get away with. I mean, there are all kinds of things that women need to deal with. So it's not completely the same. And then there are like just the egregious things that you've seen in the Me Too movement over the last year. And, you know, all of us have our own lists. But the thing that women can do about that, in addition to trying to fight to deal with those things in that culture at a broader sense for themselves on an individual basis, is to surround yourself with people you want to be around who will support you, and also be easier on yourself. But I don't want to absolve us on dealing with those bigger, more structural or systemic things. That's important too.
Yes, thanks for bringing that in and balancing it out, because they are both with us. So if you could look back on now, knowing what you know now, which I'm guessing you think you know a lot, but you still don't know enough, because that's usually the way we are, all people. So knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given your younger self, or what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
I could say many things, but I think the older I get and the more experienced I get, the more I appreciate that leadership is both a permanent apprenticeship and highly contextualized. So it's a permanent apprenticeship and highly contextualized in that there are times when you think, I know how to run an organization, or I've been through some really hard things and we made it through the other end. I know something about how to do that. And then you deal with a similar problem in a different context with different people, and it's like you're in kindergarten all over again. And so it's not that there aren't lessons that can be brought from one context to another, but you know, it's actually, and there are, and those are real, but learning how to apply those in the right way and in that contextualized approach, and sometimes recognizing that that thing that worked in that other context just isn't going to work at this moment in time and in this situation. I think it's taken me a long time to appreciate that, because I think, like many women, I did not have the natural born confidence as a leader. Maybe I still don't, compared to male colleagues who, you know, just seem to feel like they can take it all on. But I think I feel confident in my own ability to navigate very difficult things, and my own recognition that what works in one place is not necessarily going to work. And that kind of getting comfortable with the fact that you will never learn it all, that you will never have a toolkit that you can always lean on. If you're comfortable with that, and you're building up the range of the number of tools you have in your toolkit, but you're recognizing you may have to use them in different ways, or they may not always work. That combination of more assets and knowledge and experience, but also just more comfort with accepting ambiguity and like your own limitations. I think that that's something that anybody that I wish I had come to terms with a little bit earlier. But instead, there were a few times I got really surprised because I thought, oh no, I thought I knew how to do this. I guess not. And you have to come up with a new approach.
That's good. And I would imagine that when you thought, oh, I thought I knew how to do this, the next thought was, oh, I'm still not there, as opposed to, no, this is just the way it's always going to be.
Yeah, well, and also this can be a little bit brutal to feel like you're back at square one. And, I took some really wild swings in my career, going from academia to working a lot with the military, to being in the government, to working on different issue areas, to working with different people of different cultural backgrounds and like really different issue areas. Conflict, peace building, cybersecurity, public diplomacy, international development. These are not all the same people, and the way the work is done is different. And so mine has been a journey of perpetual extreme humility, because it can be kind of brutal at first to find out that toolkit doesn't work. But I think, what you asked about what to tell younger women and just others generally, I think the lesson there is getting increasingly comfortable with the fact that you'll figure it out. You will figure it out. And the fact that going through that is a really valuable experience that gives you new things to bring to the table that help others and help your institution. But yeah, it's I don't want to understate how much you can wake up one day and think, wow, this is not going to be good.
And then what you're saying is, and I will get through it.
Yeah, and you figure it out. A friend of mine once told me that sometimes the only way out is through. And I think that's just great advice. Sometimes you have to say, okay, I thought I was ready to do this. I was badly mistaken because of circumstances, or because this is actually a lot different from what I thought this was going to be like, or what I am not as well prepared as I thought I was going to need to be, or I didn't even know what I was going to need to be prepared for the circumstance. But then you just roll up your sleeves, and the only way out is through. And people do get through things. And I think most of us look back at those hard times as really some of the most important times in a professional career. I mean, I certainly feel that way myself. And now I look back at some of the times that were the hardest or the most surprising and think I was so lucky to have had those experiences.
And I so appreciate what you're saying, because I think in the moment at least in my experience of people I work with and my own self, I think that I should know how to deal with it better. And if you just, your behavior belief of this is just the way it is, it's going to happen, the only way out is through, there's such a relaxing around it. Then in that way, by relaxing, you can go through easier. You have more ideas. Does that make sense? You're not tensing up.
It does. And I can't claim to be as enlightened as you and never tensing up. But I think one of the things it forces you to do is, I think the art of strategy is about setting priorities and recognizing what is actually important. And one of the things that can happen at times that are stressful or you feel ill-equipped to deal with them is a person can be overwhelmed by just the number of things. And you can observe people focusing on the wrong things in those times. But if you do, to your point, take a deep breath and say, what is actually important here? Mm-hmm. What is noise? What can I actually influence? And what is vexing and horrible, but I do not have any control over that? if you can assess that and then focus on what can I do about those things that I control, on those things that are actually important, I think that's also a critical strategic asset and an important component of leadership.
And what can I control? Like, I love all of what you're saying, and the what can I control part is so critical. Like, what are the things that I have no control over? Let it go. And what can I control? What can I make a difference on? What's within my sphere here?
Yeah, many of us in international development, international affairs work on incredibly difficult issues. And there are some real acts of injustice or oppression or poverty and there are some things that you have some ability to influence. And there are other things that you just have to recognize, especially, I run kind of a medium-sized NGO in the grand scheme of things. And there are some tasks that are beyond our power to, or there are some issues that are beyond our power to affect. So then you say, well, what is the most impactful thing that we can do? What is the most impactful thing that I can do? I think that helps to get through the times that can seem very overwhelming. But you need to cultivate a little bit of a distance, an emotional distance, and also a distance in perspective, because otherwise it can just all be so overwhelming.
So I was wondering, as you were talking, what do you do to recharge, or how do you stay charged?
My husband and I just like to hang out together and be around. I have a child, but he's off at college. So I would say, family and friends, like most people, very important. I'm a runner. I like yoga. I like to read. And I think I am pretty disciplined about not working all the time. I think if you are running a complex organization and you are emotionally and intellectually invested in it, as I am, and you have a personality that likes to be all in, I think you also have to be really, really careful that you don't work all of the time or even keep your brain on it all the time, because you lose that emotional distance. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You really need to put it all aside. So I try to be pretty disciplined about that, actually. And I try really hard not to buy into the cult of the busy, where, you just look frazzled all the time. Some of the great leaders I've worked with always seemed like they had all the time in the world to talk to people, to listen, to do things they thought were important. And I always really admired that, because I think it so stands out from the norm. Mm-hmm. Our environment today, where people almost seem like they're competing with each other to see how little they're sleeping and how much they're working. And I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it leads to good leadership. I think it sets a really bad example for our teams. Personally, I'm not going to claim I'm perfect on this. I'm not, but I try to make time and space. And I'm sort of on the cusp between an introvert and an extrovert. So I love to be around people. I get a lot of energy ideas from them, but I'm also exhausted by them after a while. And so for myself, I need to make equal time to sort of engage with people and brainstorm and be in the moment. But I need space to reflect and, be in a more quiet environment. And so I'm a little stubborn about trying to make sure I have that kind of balance. And I hope other people will be too, because they'll be a lot happier.
I appreciate that you said that, actually.
I sleep at night, and I am not ashamed of it. I'm in so many meetings where people say, I was just in a meeting last week where someone said, sleep is a waste of time, or sleep is overrated. And I felt the need to speak up. And I said, no, it's not. It's critical. We need to get sleep. We need to make time and be healthy, functioning people with healthy human relationships, because otherwise I think it does come at the cost of our missions and our organizations. And I think that if you're in a leadership position, people are watching you and you're setting a tone for others too. And I don't want to be responsible for people neglecting their health and their families when they really don't need to be.
We should do there should be something like why leaders need to sleep, because I agree with you 100%. You're at your best sleep deprived. Nobody.
some people are better at sleep deprivation than others, and I'm not one of those people.
I'd say I'm going to vote that 99% of the people aren't. But yeah, there's definitely a cult of busyness. I like the way you put that. So that's like who gets the most points because they're so busy.
Is this a bad time to tell you I have to run to another meeting in 10 minutes?
No, because I know I was going to end at 10. I mean, at the top of the hour, and I'm watching the clock. That's why I'm looking over there. And we'll just cut this bit out, or we'll leave it in. Who cares? Anything you wanted to say that we haven't talked about? Anything you hope to talk about?
Yeah, I think that, well, there was nothing in particular, but, I think I'd want to encourage younger people who are listening to both think about the benefits and joys of leadership, but also not to get so wrapped up in it. And I'm thinking and talking at the same time, so bear with me. On the one hand, sometimes you see people shy away from leadership positions because it does come with responsibility and accountability. And I'd actually urge people to say, like, well, embrace it, because owning something like that and being responsible, there's a real reward that comes from that. And not just for yourself. I think I mentioned one of the things I most enjoy about running organizations is helping other people to be successful. Yeah, I can think about a lot of individual people I've worked with and who have just thrived and done great things and are far more talented than I am. And, my small role in supporting them is a joy of my professional life. The other thing I'd like to say, though, is that I feel that in our schools and our universities and our culture, we want everybody to talk about being a leader all the time. Everybody doesn't need to be a leader all the time, including me, and I'm in a leadership position. Sometimes I need to be a follower. Sometimes I need to be part of some coalition or movement. And I think a challenge for leaders is we get so used to being in charge that sometimes you have to check yourself and tell yourself to shut up. Especially if you're really energized by an idea. But I think we should also be encouraging people to be leaders and not to be afraid and to embrace that accountability, but also tell people that, but there's a time and place for leadership, and there's a time and place to be a follower and a partner and part of a coalition or a movement. And that's valuable too. Telling everybody they have to be a leader all of the time is not a great message. And I think, with the college application scandal, it calls attention to all the things we look to young people to do to sort of pad their resumes and what is valued in the job market and in college admissions and all these kinds of things. And it's all about leader, 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 leader. Well, not everybody can or should be a leader all the time. And as a society, we will not be better off if we have a million individual leaders. At times you need to fall in with others if you really want to get something done, and that's good. We ought to reward that too.
I like that a lot, and thank you for saying it and raising it. I'm doing a roundtable at this Wild Network, and I'm going to be talking to young women coming up, and I'll make sure that I pass that on to them.
And it can be different things at different times, and sometimes everything at once in different settings, and that's okay.
And leadership can be defined differently. I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily leading an organization. It means doing my job the best that I can do it, and managing my work in a leaderly way.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think we may be the only international development organization of any size that has a leadership practice. We run programs and very intentionally integrate leadership development into our programs. And some people reject that. Well, I'm just a librarian, I'm just a teacher, I just work for a local government. And leadership in that sense is also just a mindset that you have some kind of agency, that you can lead some kind of change within your own setting. It can be in your own classroom or your own school or your own library or your own civic organization. You don't have to be a prime minister or the CEO of a Fortune 1000 company to be a leader. It's about having that sense of agency, having some tools to help bring others together to accomplish things. I mean, to me, that's what leadership is about. And, you know, so many more people can add an element of leadership in their life. And again, from our work here at IREX, so much of it is a mindset that change is possible and that you as an individual can affect some change. And yeah, it sure helps to have a few tools in your toolkit about how to do that, but also a network of others that you can turn to help you achieve your goals. So I do think that that's something that very much infuses our work. And even though it's a little bit rare to have such a focus on leadership, most people you work with in this sector, if you ask them what really matters in terms of whether different things are successful or not, it's so often it comes down to leadership. There was some person or some individual at any level in any place in the world who just got something done, who sort of took it on and helped mobilize others. So I think that's a real key in international development, and just so many other challenges and opportunities that we see in our societies.
I join you in that, and I want, you know, that thing that we believe about leadership, that it's them and not us, or that we need a title, or that's what I would like to see be changed. So
yeah, Bill Drayton at Ashoka says everyone a change maker, but I think a lot of what he is saying is everyone a leader.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let's close since we're at the top of the hour, and I'm going to thank you very much for your time and for your great insights. I really have enjoyed the conversation, and there's things that you said that I want to think more about and follow up on. So thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. It was a pleasure and an honor.
So don't go.
All right.
For you. One, can you think of anybody else you would like me to talk to? Anybody you think would be good for me to include in my leadership lessons from leaders project?
Yeah. Okay. Let me think about that.
Because we're especially looking, we being me, people of color, especially any women of color, would be fab. But anybody that you admire or you would like, because I got you because somebody wanted you to, they wanted to hear from you. That's how you got on my list.
So two people I really admire who might be a little different from some of the people you've had on. One is Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who she's now at Georgetown University, but she was one of the most senior diplomats in the State Department and just a really extraordinary woman. Also, I always admire the vision of Shamal Idris, who's running Search for Common Ground right now. I think he's another good person to talk with.
A friend of mine just got a job at Search for Common Ground.
Oh, there you go.
Do these people know you? If I wrote and said that you were recommending or were referring me, that would
recommend them. Yes, they would both know me. They would both know me.
Great. So those were my main two questions. The third question the second question would be is if you would be open to having a conversation with me sometime about what I do and what you guys are doing with leadership, if that would be.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So I'll follow up on an email. So let me just tell you how this is going to go. Sure. I will send this video off to the video guy. So there's someone before you, and then he'll get to you. So it's probably going to be like 2 or 3 weeks. Then when he does his magic, I send it to you. I'll say in the subject heading, for action, do you approve it or not? You can look at it and say, I don't like this, I do like that, whatever. Once you clear it, then I will put it on YouTube and offer it to Humantum.
Sounds great. One thing for you to be aware of is I am going out to the Global Philanthropy Forum next week. Then I'll be back. I'm releasing a huge Brookings study, and then I'm going to Africa for a week and a half. So There are a few days in there, but it's just the between next Friday and sort of the 20th of April is a little bit of a ragged period for me schedule-wise. So I'll be slower in turning anything around during that time. So if you have something either before next Friday or you're a little patient with me in that window, because I could either be in Benin or launching this big new Brookings report I have coming out or something. So sorry about that.
No worries. We have no deadline here.
All right, great.
No worries. And I'm going to be in Namibia, but I don't think you're going to be there
I am not. Yeah.
crossing. But that'll all. Don't worry about it. And congratulations on your book Brookings Institute release.
Yeah, it's actually highly relevant for you. It's about the 93. We did interviews with 93 leaders in global development.
Yes.
It's coming out next week, and there'll be a big launch on April 8th at Brookings.
Yes.
It's highly relevant for you.
Oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps in my hair follicles. Thank you. That'll be good. So it'll be available then.
It'll be available next week.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Why didn't we mention that? That we should.
I don't know. We could have talked about a lot of things.
Okay, I'll let you go. Right. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn.
I'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.